Hello, I'm Gerard Lyons, the bank's Chief Economist and Group Head of Global Research. I'd like to talk to you about a major piece of work, a report that the research team has just produced called The Super Cycle. We're going to follow it up in coming months with further reports based on the super cycle, which delve into the issues in far more detail. The report so far has received great feedback from our clients and indeed from policymakers, and we hope that the follow-up reports will likewise make a big impact. So in this short video clip, I'd like to focus on three issues. First, what is a super cycle? Second, what it implies in some of the numbers for the future. And third, what's driving this super cycle. So first, the super cycle. Actually, to talk about a super cycle now when the world economy has had a financial crisis may seem strange to some people. But the reality is that in our view, the world economy is in its third super cycle. The world has had two previous super cycles. The first was the tail end of the 19th century from 1870 up until the outbreak of the First World War. That saw an unprecedented period of strong global growth, led by America, which at that time moved from the fourth to the first biggest economy in the world. And the super cycle then was driven not only by the emergence of America, but also by the adoption of technologies discovered and adapted and implemented during the Industrial Revolution. The second super cycle was after the Second World War, when the world economy grew by about 5% per annum from about 1946 until the early 70s. And that was characterized by the post-Second World War reconstruction and also by the emergence of Japan and much of East Asia. And we think we're now in the third super cycle. In our view, it began around 2000. And the report goes up to the year 2030, not because we think that's the end of the super cycle, but because it's sufficiently far ahead to give us some forecasting horizon, but also not too far ahead that it seems too far into the future. So first point is that we think we're in a super cycle, and the world has already experienced two super cycles, and this is the third. The second point is, what does it mean in terms of numbers? Well, let's put it in perspective. The world economy, despite the financial crisis, is now twice the size it was a decade ago. World economy is about $64 trillion. Not only is it twice the size it was a decade ago, it's actually back to its pre-recession level. And in our view, it's going to continue to grow. In terms of the super cycle, we talk about the world economy in nominal or cash terms, that is taking into account of both inflation and growth, reaching $308 trillion by the year 2030. In real terms, we think it will be growth almost doubling in size, up to just under $130 trillion, and allowing for some currency appreciation about $143 trillion. So significant appreciation in terms of growth of the world economy. But maybe we shouldn't get too het up on the numbers. Some people might find the numbers seem startlingly large, but the reality is that we've factored in some pretty cautious, quite frankly, assumptions. We assume China will grow by only 6.9% per annum over those 20 years. India will grow about 9.2% or so. So the numbers point to India and China becoming more important. Indeed, that's already happening. This calendar year, for instance, the emerging economies, which are 1/3 of the global economy, account for 2/3 of global growth. And that's going to continue to be the case in the future. So to conclude the second part, the numbers point to the world economy growing strongly, led by the emerging world, indeed led by our markets. But the third point is to stress the underlying drivers. To be frank, we don't know whether our numbers will be spot on, but the important thing is don't get too carried away with the numbers, but to focus on the underlying story. The story is a shift in the balance of power. Indeed, we've talked for years about the New World Order. The super cycle is building on that. We think a super cycle better describes what's happening because the West itself will still do well out of this because the global cake will continue to grow. In fact, the winners will be the countries with the cash, the commodities, and the creativity. Many of these will be across the emerging world. And I would encourage you to go away and read the report, because in the report we talk about some of the underlying factors. The scale of the countries growing, the likes of China, Indonesia, India. The fact that many countries have the cash and financial resources to continue to invest in their infrastructure and in terms of the wide parts of their economy. We also talk about the trade aspects. More of the world is becoming interconnected. New trade corridors, intra-Asian trade, Asian-African, Asian-Middle Eastern, Asian-Latin American trade, Asian-European trade. And then finally we talk about what I call perspiration and inspiration. Perspiration, there's more people working, more people spending, a bigger middle class. Inspiration, creativity, technology, innovation. So the underlying drivers are the third point, the scale, the financial resources, the trade, perspiration and inspiration. And to bring it all together, three key stories I've just told you. First, we're in the third super cycle. Second part was to actually get a handle on the numbers, the scale of what's happening. And third is to actually recognize some of the underlying trends. The reason behind this is not only to galvanize people and to understand what's happening in our markets, to actually put the current volatility and uncertainty in perspective. In the report we say that there will be setbacks, that the business cycle does exist, that we shouldn't be complacent about the near-term downside risks, but we need to put them in the longer-term positive upward perspective. Thank you.